Welcome back to another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast. I am one of your hosts, Mara Shorr, and I am a partner in Shorr Solutions along with our founding partner and my partner over here. This gentleman, if you can see us on video, you can see him pointing to himself, Jay Shorr, who is not only my business partner and the founding partner, but he is my pops, my dad. So we always first and foremost. And today we are going to be talking about something that truly we have been talking with our clients a lot about, and that is what makes a great practice administrator for your cosmetic, aesthetic, medical practice. So we were chatting a little bit before this, coming up with a short list. You know, this is going to be a long list otherwise, and we are always happy to continue the conversation otherwise. But Jay/Dad, let's go ahead and let's get started on this conversation of what makes a great practice administrator.
In order to be a great practice administrator, you really have to be a good leader. So let's define what a good leader is. A great leader has to have great people skills, because we've all seen the things of the steps of leadership. What's a leader and what's a boss? I never really, as a leader, want to consider myself as a boss, but I rather consider myself as a teammate. Our team. You know, I've always been raised, I never need to tell anybody that works for me that I'm the boss. In my entire career, people know who the boss is, and they know who the boss isn't. So that is never a way to get your people, you know, to really appreciate who you are. But being a great leader is a way to
Just out of
collaborate.
curiosity, does that mean that you were or weren't a fan of the Tony Danza show, Who's the Boss?
I was.
Sorry, it was too good to throw in there. You threw in Who's the Boss. I had to.
I actually, that was in my time frame with Alyssa Milano and Tony Danza. I really did like that show. But to be a great leader, you have to have empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. You know, walk a mile in their shoes, because everyone has some type of positive and not so positive issues in their life. And our team seriously is made up of people, our teammates, our partners, non-financial partners, but everybody really that works with you and is on your team should really look at it as if it is their practice. Now, I know there might be tension about the financials, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But the number one, front and foremost, is the ability to be a good leader, to be able to drive everybody towards the identical goal, even though you go about it differently. Look, you and I are both equal partners in our business. We don't always go about getting to the finish line in the identical manner. Could be generational. It could be just we have a different way of doing it. You know, 5 times 1 is 5, and 6 minus 1 is 5, and 3 plus 2 is 5. There's many ways to get to that finish line. And sometimes the generational of leadership, I have a totally different way, because I've done it that way for many years and have been successful at it. However, it's not sustainable because things have changed. You can't use the yellow pages anymore, which made my practice so successful. I never would have thought of going digital. The sound of digital, rallied my brain as nobody looks at it today.
That's okay. It's how I feel about the yellow pages. So we're all.
You don't even use yellow pages for the child to sit on when they get a haircut at the barbershop anymore, right? So in all seriousness, it's the ability to be a great leader. And really, as a good practice administrator, there's a difference between a practice manager and a practice administrator. Managers can work for an administrator, and managers don't necessarily have financial responsibility. They maybe have responsibility over people, maybe processes, but not necessarily the numbers. How many times, Mara, we have our base of clients, and they kind of feel that their practice administrator or manager doesn't really have as much of a grasp on their business. And we say to them, well, do they know what you pay for items? Do they know how much revenue you have? Do they know? And they say, no, that's pretty private. I don't want them to have it.
And this is a great point as a second point that you're making right now, Jay, because the financial component and the financial knowledge, number one, when you're hiring a practice administrator, you're hiring somebody for that practice administrator, having those conversations ahead of time to know what is, number one, what is their comfort level? Are they somebody that is able to really crunch the numbers? Are they someone that's able to analyze the numbers once they're crunched? Is this a position that somebody is going to be working with the numbers day in, day out? And just like you said, we have some clients that the practice owners don't even want their administrators having access to the numbers. So knowing what you're looking for going in before you even hire this person is going to be key, because this is the difference of, is it going to work out or is it not going to work out? Because you can't give a non-numbers person numbers and expect it to work. And you can't take someone like yourself who, if you listened to Jay before, if you as listeners have heard Jay speak before, you know he is the numbers guy. This is Jay. This is what he does. And to try and expect him to provide results without giving him access to the data is not going to work either. So you can't expect a practice administrator to provide really strong results and make really effective change if you don't give them access to the numbers, because you need to give them access to the data.
There's a difference between how much table paper and Band-Aids cost when you have the McKessons, the Shines, the Cardinals, the different level of vendors that you have, and how much is your biomedical hazardous waste, and you ask somebody as a practice administrator, do you know how much this is? And that's different. That's really a manager's type of a job. But are you really giving them access to a full P&L, your tax return, whether you're a sub S or you're a C Corp or you're a professional limited liability?
Just so that everybody knows, can you give what does P&L stand for? I want to make sure everybody has that.
Oh, Pete and Louie. Pete and Louie.
That's it. That's exactly it. Pete and Louie. And there we go. We're done.
Now, it's interesting that, that's a good point, Mara. People have written to me and they write Peter, N, Nancy, L, Larry, PNL. And I know right away that the person that is sending that to me doesn't really understand what a P&L really means, and it stands for profit and loss. And I apologize in advance if some of the things that I say are primitive to you, but believe me when we tell you that they are foreign to other people. All right. So you have to have full knowledge of your profit and loss statement. And with that comes your tax statement at the end of the year, because your P&L, profit and loss, and your actual tax statement that you send to the federal government don't necessarily marry. And that's because one has earnings before interest, depreciation, interest before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, commonly known as EBITDA, however you want to do it, same as tomato. All right. But that EBITDA versus the bottom line, because a P&L isn't going to have depreciation and amortization, yet for tax purposes, your tax report will. And, I don't agree a lot of times with practice owners, because they feel that if they give their practice administrator access to the financials, that the practice administrator may, if they don't have friends in the practice, we'll get to that a little bit too, share some of that, or they just don't even want them to know how much money is coming in. Now, I disagree with that. I respect it if that's how you feel. However, you don't always want people that are in charge as an administrator feeling that you are the rich, wealthy doctor. Why? Because anybody can see $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million coming in, but have no idea what it costs to operate that practice, rent, mortgage, utilities, supplies, cost of goods sold. We can go on and on with this. And if you are a plastic surgeon, facial plastic surgeon that has a surgery center like I did, the build out is insurmountable. Plus the everyday running of that OR to properly man it, staff it, man it, woman it, whatever you want to do it, staff it, and have anesthesia providers and all the supplies that go into it versus a regular practice, that is an elevated level. All right. Now, as a former practice administrator and owner, partner in a medical practice, I did have managers working for me. I had a clinic manager who handled all of the MAs and nursing staff. My clinic manager was an RN.
Mhm.
And then I had an admin manager who handled all of the front desk staff and administrative and the billing staff. And she was in charge of making sure we had supplies on the non-medical side, copy paper, toner for the fax machine. You know what I said? Fax machine? Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
But one thing I do want to really focus on here, Jay, that you're talking about is that having somebody, and this could be point three, right? If we're going to say we're creating outlines here, but one of the things that where I see you going with this is that you want your practice administrator to have industry knowledge. So especially when you're talking about someone that is not only in charge of, yes, ordering supplies. So do they know what type of sutures need to be ordered? Do they know what every role in the practice is? Do they know what each procedure that the practice does, that the provider, whether that is surgical or non-surgical, do they have that insider knowledge, especially because once you get to that level of a practice administrator, that's when you need somebody that really knows this industry. What we want to focus on is, do they know all of the procedures that you're doing in your practice? Because you cannot be teaching those types of things at the practice administrator level. So, and one of the things you brought up, Jay, when we were chatting just a few minutes before we got started, is not just one of the advantages of having somebody that has been hired locally, for instance, is that not only do they know the procedures that the practice does, but they know the competition in place as well. I'm not saying steal from your competitor, but what I am saying is that somebody that knows not just the industry, but they know what is it that is being charged per procedure? What is the going rate in your area? If you take somebody from Miami, or a suburb of Miami, and you then try and hire them in LA, they may be severely undercharging for a BBL, for instance.
Knowing the procedures and knowing the profitability of the procedures are totally different. All right. Because that comes back to the finances. Now, it is very easy. We see people that hire managers from med spas into surgical practices. In the times like today, when we are in the great resignation and staff is so hard to come by. Now, look, many, many years ago, we used to hear there's no great staff in Miami, there's no great staff in Philly, there's no great staff in Nashville. Let's go on. We can go through
Every
Chicago
city.
and
We heard it for every
Arizona,
city.
and Beverly Hills, doesn't matter. And we used to say, oh, I'm so tired of hearing that from everybody. But I will share with you, it is a fact today. So, really, to get a great administrator in this industry today, if you are a surgical practice, maybe you can get a great PCC, patient care coordinator, from a med spa because they know how to sell Botox and Dysport and Xeomin and Jeuveau and Restylane and Juvederm. I'm going to name multiple so we don't put this onto one product. They don't know how to sell the difference between a primary breast augmentation, for example, that might be a female anywhere from her late teens, average to 30s. They have them, of course, we know they have them and above. And the facelift of an aging, mature person like myself that might want the facelift, neck lift, different than a primary procedure. All right. Now, okay, the procedure is 3,000, 5,000, 10,000. All right. Now you've got to be able to manage that patient care coordinator as an administrator. Now, what is the one thing a patient care coordinator is most concerned about when they sell? Their commission, bar none, because I don't know of a patient care coordinator that doesn't have a base hourly or salary plus a commission. Whereas patient care coordinators are different than administrators because administrators should never be commissioned. All right. They should always be bonused on profitability and increased revenue. I really have a really bad feeling when you commission a manager on sales because you can't be great at both. You can be good at best on each, but you can never be great because you're focusing too much of your attention on the sales process, which lines your pocket. I don't have a problem with that. I love money. However, I love profitability and net more than I love the gross.
Well, and aside from, so I shouldn't say aside from because it's incredibly important. In addition to, we'll go with that, Jay. How's that? In addition
I love
to,
it. I love
love
it.
it. In addition to the financial knowledge. So when we're talking about industry knowledge and having that overall grasp and that nitty gritty grasp, right? So not only do we have industry knowledge when it comes to the financial component, but also wanting to touch on when you have that industry knowledge, then you also need to understand the legal and compliance that goes along with that as well, both on the surgery side and on the non-surgical side. And so again, it needs to be industry knowledge and it needs to be specific to your state. Sometimes it needs to be specific to your county if we're talking about surgery centers and certifications. And when we're looking at all of these specific components, you need to be up to date and up to snuff when it comes to legal and compliance. And if you are not, for any reason, you need a practice administrator that is confident in working with a risk manager, that is confident in working with somebody as it relates to OSHA, that is confident and competent as it relates to working with the folks with when it comes to legal guidance, with a practice management consultant. But I like to start with somebody that is already really strong when it comes to the legal and compliance where your practice is located, because we all know things differ from state to state so severely.
You hire a great practice administrator, they should or better have a great, like you mentioned, a great knowledge of HIPAA, OSHA, and legal compliance. Because bringing somebody in from out of state because they did well, example, both Mara and I live in Florida. I live in South Florida. Mara lives in Central Florida. If you bring somebody in from another state, and there is no such thing in my world as a gray area, it's either black or it's white. If it's not written, it doesn't exist. Because it's not mentioned, don't assume that it is okay. Some people say, well, there's no violation to it. I don't want to have to be questioned or called to task to prove my innocence. Example, in the state of Florida, a medical assistant cannot inject Botox under the guidance of a doctor, allopathic, osteopathic, all right, chiropractic. Some states allow estheticians to do lasers. Many states do. In the state of Florida, an esthetician and an RN can't do lasers or fillers. Now, if you are an esthetician and you have an electrology license, you can do laser hair removal, but you can't do lasers for telangiectasias, for hemangiomas, for vascular. You're just not allowed. Reticular veins, and please don't depend. I love our vendors. Please don't depend on equipment vendors if you're a practice administrator helping to negotiate and make that decision. The vendor doesn't even always know the law. Example, in the state of Florida, when you have a laser, it must be registered with the Bureau of Laser Radiation Control in Tallahassee, our state capital. You will never, ever hear that from a laser sales rep. I'm sorry to say that if there's any reps listening, But I know that we have spoken on behalf of laser companies. And when I bring out the form and say every laser you have in your office must be registered with the Bureau of Lasers and Radiation Control, people look at me with like a second head. Well, if you don't know that, if you don't know that your esthetician or your RN can't inject and you allow, there is no reciprocity here in Florida. And in certain states, they're different. Who can own a practice? In Florida, a non-physician can own a practice. There's caveats. Certain states, they're not allowed at all. California, a physician must own 51%, and the other 49% can be owned by licensed medical providers that aren't physicians. There's more details to go with that. But if you are trying to look for people in that practice on behalf of your physician slash owner, partner, group, then if you don't know it, you're going to put people in some grave, serious danger. And knowing what paperwork, Mara, I'll let you take this part away. What paperwork goes into each procedure with consents and photography?
Correct. And that is something that when your practice manager slash practice administrator is hired, they need to be somebody that is fully on board with the processes, protocols, and procedures that go into building and strengthening and managing your practice. So that is always a trait that I love to look at. We love to look at when it comes to your practice and when it comes to hiring a practice administrator. And the final tip that I am going to give as we wrap up, final one, is do not, as a practice administrator, be friends with your team and your staff. And I say this, I'm not saying don't be friendly. You, of course, you always want to be respectful. You want to remain part of the same team, but I truly, truly say pull out the, all that the happy hours where you're going out and getting schnockered together. You shouldn't be socializing on the weekends with your staff. It is very hard, if not impossible, that once you cross those boundaries of friendship, to reel back in when you need to put your manager hat back on. And you will not, as a practice administrator, your practice administrator won't be taken with the same level of seriousness that they would otherwise. I love every single member of our Shorr Solutions team. Obviously, Jay, I love you a little bit more than everybody else if we're playing favorites.
I loved you first.
Because you're my dad. But with all of that being said, truly, it becomes very hard to reel it back in from the friend standpoint. So that is something that we always like to say, always like to keep in mind. And so with that, Jay, our conversation, I have to reel it back in now. I have to bring it to a close because you and I otherwise will go on all day long. So Jay, it's been another great episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast.
Sorry, it's over.
But with that, we're hopping right back on Zoom to go meet with clients shortly. So thank you so much for listening to another episode of Shorr Solutions, the podcast. Remember, we are always here to speak with you one-on-one. And thank you so much for joining us.